I'm Representative April Berg, and thank you for joining me on what is going to be our last show of the season. We have an incredible show planned for you today. We'll be talking about housing as a human right. And we've got two amazing guests here to talk through it, both as policymakers, activists, and folks who have lived through housing insecurity as lived experiences. So I'm going to let my guests introduce themselves, and we're going to start with Tran from the Washington State Human Rights Commission.
Hey, thank you so much, April, for setting this up, and love to see Mary here as well. My name is Tran, and I ran for office back in 2021, Bothell City Council, conceded, and am now currently on the Human Rights Commission for the state of Washington, appointed by the office of Governor Jay Inslee. I want to rewind for a second and say, I'm so happy that we're closing out the season. This is awesome because now we're going to go, April, you're going to go into, you're coming at the end of your election season. You're gearing up for session in January. It's going to be an exciting time. And we can talk about, some of the things we're looking forward to seeing in housing and how that plays into human rights. I'll pass it off to Mary.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you for putting this on. I am honored to be here, especially the last show. Mary Fosse, I currently serve on the Everett City Council for District 1, and I am also serving on the Puget Sound Regional Council Growth Management Policy Board, and I am running for the State House, Mike Sell's old seat. And yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to spending some time in Olympia with Representative Berg.
That will be awesome. And that's exactly why I invited these two guests to the show today, because they are truly subject matter experts when it comes to housing and human rights. So let's just start there. And Han, I'll start with you. What makes housing a human rights issue?
Oh my goodness. It's a phrase that we hear all the time, and and I'm happy it's gotten to the point where people know it by heart, right? People know that this is your mission and they understand the phrase, or at least recognize it. You know that it's setting in, right? And people are getting the message that housing is a human right. There are so many rights that we as people have that a lot of us with privilege take for granted. Things like clean air, clean water, things like access to public spaces, right? Housing is one of the biggest rights that we have that creates stability for people's lives. And I think you'll ask about it later, but just in case, I'll go into it a little bit now. For those of you who don't know, I was actually born in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, and I escaped a war in Vietnam, the aftermath of it, on a rickety boat. And we spent time in a refugee camp in the Philippines, and we were lucky enough to be sponsored to come to the United States. And our first point of contact with the United States was actually the SeaTac airport. And we lived in public housing for a number of years while we were trying to get our lives stabilized. And when I say we, it's mainly, I have my parents to thank for it. They worked, both of them worked multiple jobs to get food on the table. And we lived in Burien and White Center during this time, where there was a lot of diversity, because that's where a lot of refugees were going. So we had people from Samoa, we had people from the Latino, Latine, and Latina community, as well as obviously Cambodia and Vietnam, due to the aftermath of the wars out there. So housing as a human right, and I'll say this and then pass it off to Mary, is an essential part of being able to not just survive, but to also thrive.
Absolutely. And Mary, I think, I know we've had these conversations. I know you agree with Han on this one, but can you talk a little bit about it being a human rights issue and your lived experience, because you've got a story here.
Thanks. Yeah, I do believe wholeheartedly that it is a human rights issue. And coming from a background of, I was born into low-income housing. My mom was a single parent, and she really, struggled to keep a roof over our head. And then we had some health impacts. I had a long duration of pneumonia where she had to take unpaid time off of work, and then we lost our utilities and our phone, and we lost our housing. So that was a struggle throughout my youth, and having that kind of instability really permeates so many intersectional aspects. When somebody wants to have address their mental health, or behavioral issues, or something along those lines, it's impossible to do without having your feet on the ground and stability. When you're trying to be in a place of learning and get that education and prepare for the future, how are you supposed to do that when you don't have the stability of a roof over your head, or knowing where to go home to? It wasn't until I had moved up to Everett that I realized that sensation, that feeling of the sense of home. I had never had that before.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with my neighbors. I learned what it was like to be in a place for a long period of time, and getting to know your community. And yeah, I just fell in love here. But that feeling, that sense, I hadn't had it. And so I think that's really played into a lot of my feelings and my love for Snohomish County and this area. Uh,
Yeah.
it's really a wonderful place to live.
That is awesome. And I think that's the piece I wanted to hit on next, is that intersectionality. And so Mary, just, I mean, you hit on it a little bit, right? The healthcare piece. And it's something, it seems like a tangent, but really foundational for your family's experience. So when that healthcare piece hit, it affected housing and vice versa. So in our state, I'm lucky that we were able to sign into law the Apple Health and Homes Act that really does directly link it, right? So it's a direct link to housing and healthcare. But talk to me a little bit about this intersection, Mary. About it, because your role as a city councilor is unique, right? In terms of, you are boots on the ground, you have this lived experience, and now you're a policymaker. So talk to me about that intersectionality, not just maybe with healthcare, but other areas of our lives, and why housing is so important.
Well, we know in Snohomish County that we're dealing with a lot of issues, for instance, around people experiencing chronic homelessness. And, I think we're probably all advocates on here of housing first options,
Mhm.
because it's really hard to address so many of the other issues in your life when you don't have that roof over your head.
Yeah.
And so, as a council member, and as a future legislator at the state, it's going to be a priority of mine to be looking at housing first before we can actually get to those other mental health and substance use disorder treatments, and those other wraparound services. We need to make sure that we have that available housing, and it really does come into play. And I think that we've had issues in our community with communities being open enough to allow different types of housing here. And sometimes that breaks my heart a little bit, because, I
Mhm.
was one of those families. And when you're talking about, students that, need housing in order to go to school, and it's very hard to be in a shelter or live in your car,
Mhm.
and constantly move around to different schools. I've had years like that in, my education, and you miss parts
Yeah.
of that foundational education that you need. And it took a lot of time for me to make that up.
Yeah.
And it's just essential to kind of have that stability to start with.
Absolutely. And I think, as I think of it kind of like a circle, and now we're drawing a bigger circle. And Han, that's where your role on the Human Rights Commission is so powerful, because it's not a local role. You are representing us at the statewide level, at the state level, in terms of human rights and housing. I mean, Mary touched on it: healthcare, education, dignity. And so talk a little bit about the Human Rights Commission and the role that housing plays in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And even before I jump in there, April, thank you for telling me about the Apple Health and Homes Act that was signed by our governor and then introduced or led by Representative Chop. I read up on it a little bit briefly. I mean, it's so important that we decriminalize homelessness. That's a big first step. And so I think that act really addresses that, right? If we say that homelessness is more a chronic homelessness, is more of a medical condition than it is a criminal act, that changes the conversation, and that changes root cause analysis, and then the outcome and the solution as well. And it brings about a lot more humanity to the conversation, as opposed to having someone be put in jail for this type of what used to be considered an infraction of the law. But yeah, so Human Rights Commission, fun topic. I was appointed by the office of Governor Jay Inslee this past June. I have the Human Rights Commission, and I'll step back a little bit. Any commission in the state of Washington has the purpose of providing a space where residents of Washington can shape the quality of life for other residents in the state. In other words, it's a really great space for you to bring in the voices of the communities that you reflect, from your lived background. So there are over 230 boards and commissions that the governor is responsible for. And if you have the privilege of time, I really encourage you to look into getting an appointment on a commission or a board. It doesn't even have to be at a state level, honestly. It could be with your municipality. For example, if your passion is in social justice and addressing redlining, the Planning Commission for your city is a great place for you to learn about these things and start to dismantle that, right? So that the way housing looks now isn't influenced anymore by what happened in the past, right? It's hard to get away from that, and dismantling that is really difficult, but it's work that's worthwhile. Commission, it comprises of a group of people that are entrusted by the government with authority to do something, to take action. So when we're talking about the Human Rights Commission, it's a quasi-judicial role, which means each of the 5 commissioners, including the chair of the commission, reviews cases that investigators provide a recommendation and a finding for. Essentially, a finding is like if you have a pre-finding settlement where the 2 parties that are in there,
It's like Law and Order. I don't know why. When you say like a finding,
sorry, I'm starting to nerd out on this.
I know. I was just like, okay, are we? I'm like bump. And so, but that's important though, right? So to be on a commission that can do a finding, that's huge.
Yes, it's huge. So we have a couple lawyers on the commission, which I'm thankful for because I am not a lawyer. My background is in engineering, and that's what I was going to bring into this conversation too. Is the commission is comprised of people who are bringing in not only their lived experience, but also their expertise. So, for example, Commissioner Gamboa, who is a lawyer, has expertise in migrant farmers' rights. Commissioner Sabaya is a lawyer who focuses on insurance and transportation. So he's got the credit and insurance portion of the Human Rights Commission. James Moore covers education. Myself, I cover tech and housing. So, and of course, our commissioner chair, Deborah Cook, she covers disability rights, right? So we have the reason why people get appointed is really to make sure that we have the breadth of lived experience and expertise to help make a lot of these important decisions, because it is judicial. It is going to impact somebody's lives, multiple people's lives. So yeah, it's pretty
huge.
Exciting.
So, and you said the magic word, right? Make decisions that impacts people's lives. And so I instantly kind of pivot back to Mary, because Mary, you're a city councilor and you're making those decisions. Your city, Everett, I will say had made some headlines before you came on board as a city councilor for some what I would consider not so amazing or awesome decisions for community in terms of how they were treating folks who were unhoused. And now you're in a position of power. And so talk to me a little bit about your community and about the decisions you're making because of the concerns you've heard from your community. And then talk to me a little bit about what success looks like in your view.
Well, yes, it's We've had some, no sit, no lie issues, and some development that was put off that, in my opinion, was very progressive and would have been a positive addition and very helpful with helping with children and families experiencing homelessness and reducing, ACEs for the long term. We do have some good successes going on with our pallet shelter expansions, and the ARPA dollars, with some local control there have just been, just a bright light, being able to utilize some of that money for those most in need. Going forward, expanding, those options and, housing first approaches, and also working with the county, which is helpful. Cheers to Councilmember Dunn for her work on a lot of championing different issues that impact us directly. He's a champion. But I'm actually working with Councilmember Ryan right now on potential tenant protections, hopefully going forward, because there has been a lot of different municipalities that have put things in place, kind of trying to address the fact that at the state we can't really have, rent control or things to help folks out. And while we had some protections in place, during the pandemic, with those
are going away.
Yeah, so it's, looking at different things like, additional notification times for rental increases, and the other things that we can do, like capping limits on move-in, costs and deposits, security deposits and payment plans for those, and capping, late fee percentages, and additional basic, steps like that are just treating people with dignity. And I think it's still mindful of, your small time landlord, but also of people just trying to stay in housing, which is a priority because it's more cost effective to keep people housed and help them through that than try to rehouse them after they've already started experiencing the trauma of homelessness.
So I have to ask you, is the no sit, no lie law still in the books in your city? And if so, have you been sued?
No, because they were able to do it because it was within a limited area.
Geographic area. Okay, where the pallet shelter and okay, got it. And I'm asking that for community because I know a lot of folks have wondered because there were some constitutional questions.
But it was in an industrial area. And the repercussions of that, I found out when I was doorbelling my, surrounding neighborhoods, that the unintended consequences of that is now, that criminal element that was more focused in that industrial area moved into the more residential areas. And so people were not very happy with the results of the no sit, no lie, and what they thought the impacts were going to be. And
and it's unintended consequences. And I think as we look at a lot of solutions, that there are going to be potentially unintended consequences. And I want to go back to you, Han, on something that you said, and this is, maybe not necessarily what you wanted to talk about, but you said something that really resonated with me about the privilege of time and your service on the Human Rights Commission. And Mary, this goes for you as well, right? You've got the privilege of time to serve in your city, to serve in the capacities that you do. And so how do you think that that privilege of time affects the decision making and the decision makers as we talk about housing as a human right? And Han, I'll let you jump in, and then Mary, you can answer.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many forms of different privileges that each of us have and carry. And so the privilege of time is really, I have financial stability. I can spend this time giving back to the community, providing some form of public service. And this is important because it's not always equitable, right? I have financial stability, and the people and the voices that should be at the table don't necessarily have that privilege of time. And so it's so important to draw people in who have had that experience, who can bring that voice in, not necessarily to be that voice, but to be the reflection of that community that, was in survival mode, is trying to make things work. So it's a really big, and I'm glad you poked at it a bit. It's a concept that has it nags the back of my mind. It's like, how do we make it so that things are more equitable? The people that we should be hearing from, the people that should be on these boards and commissions, how do we make it so that they can have that privilege of time?
Yeah. And Mary, what are your thoughts?
You hit the nail on the head with that. It's a privilege, I think, to be in the positions that I'm in. When I was back to neighborhood chair days, there was this Baker Heights community, fixed income, lower income community. It had a lot of fixed income seniors. It also had a very large immigrant population, and especially a huge pocket of Marshallese. And so what happened is, when they had this mass eviction of this housing, they evicted all these people, but we know that, those housing vouchers, the timeline for those is like 5 to 8 years. And so it's so hard and difficult to find, additional places to move to. So this tiny little tight-knit community that used to have, their independence celebration across the street from my house at the park here, they were just such a close-knit community that they were broken up. And, people were sent over state lines, and huge detrimental harm happened to this community. And it's not easy for them to advocate for themselves, when they're constantly struggling, with different levels of poverty. They don't, qualify for a lot of the federal support safety nets because of their unique immigration status. And the Everett Housing Authority at the time did not have an equity or, diversity,
I remember that. There was no lens for them to put that entire decision-making process through.
It did huge harm to that community. And that's what I really want to kind of fight against, is that kind of lack of foresight, and try to elevate those voices. And so, involving, people, and making sure we're doing outreach to meeting people where they're at. If they don't have the time or the privilege to be able to participate in those arenas where decisions are being made, then we definitely need to be doing the work to do the outreach to them so their voices are being heard. When I brought the Marshallese into the neighborhood association, and we had them present on their story and share, and we asked them, what is the biggest barrier for you to be able to participate and come be a part of the neighborhood work that we're doing? And they said childcare. Childcare. Like,
Simple. Or not simple, but it's an obvious.
It's a basic thing, and that's the problem with, you want to participate in a local board at your city, but they meet at 4:00 in the afternoon, and you wonder why the majority of people on that board are retired and own homes, and of a particular demographic. And it's not that they aren't wonderful servants. It's just that the diversity of opinion and perspective is a strength.
Can I jump in there really quick with a quote from Tracy Ellis Ross? Because I was at the Hope League luncheon the other day, and it was amazing to hear from her. And those of you who don't know Tracy Ellis Ross, she's an actress. She's a Black woman. She's amazing. She has a business and all that as well. That deal with hair, curly, and
I know, I love her hairline.
It's amazing to hear from her. But one of the things that she said that really resonated with me and definitely ties in here, and I'm paraphrasing, is if you have enough people or diversity at the table, everyone's blind spots tends to solve each other. So it's like, oof, like you were saying, Mary, one-sided view, right? There's nothing wrong with retired people. There's nothing wrong with people who own homes. But if that is the only opinion and voice that is at the table, it is extremely one-sided, and we need that diversity and voice.
Absolutely. And that's why I loved having both of you on the show today, because of that diversity of voice. And you're coming at it from two very similar in terms of shared values perspective, but very different life experiences and how you got there. So I love asking this ending question because I think it's important, because in all of these conversations that we've had this season, this is our third season on Kitchen Conversations, but every conversation is important. But I want to end on hope, right? And so What's that moonshot for you when it comes to housing as a human right? And for those of you who don't know, that moonshot is something that seems completely possible, but we know at this moment in time it's absolutely necessary. So I'll start with you, Mary.
Okay. I would just like everybody to be housed.
I was going to say yes. That would
To-
be yes.
yeah. Well, I think I have like a lot of hope and optimism for the future because, when we're going out and speaking to our neighbors, that previous sentiment of othering,
Mhm.
now the housing crisis and everything, everyone's being impacted by it.
Yes.
So, whether you've had somebody struggle with substance use disorder and they can no longer, find supportive housing to help them, go on to that next destination of recovery, or you have, your niece with their kids and they can't afford to have a roof over their heads because they only have one income, or there's not
Mhm.
enough subsidized housing, or your kids moved in back home after college because they can't afford to live anywhere else. Like, it is impacting everybody. So I feel like with those changing sentiments that we're in a place where leadership can actually move forward, hopefully, to pass more progressive types of policy to, start being intentional with keeping people in their homes, and, that assistance and making it permanent, where we can provide long-term, support structures so that people they have the resiliency to stay there and then, move on to the next stage with their life.
Yeah.
Or then when people are in crisis, have those safety nets there for that intervention. If they need, one-time support to keep them from going homeless, then we have that there. And, really getting kind of at the root causes of some of our homelessness issues. I think the sentiments are changing. I think people realize that it's a crisis now. And so that gives me hope that we can really actually pass some things.
Thank you for that. And Han, what's your moonshot?
So I'm cheating. I have two moonshots. One is social, one is legislative, right?
Okay.
So on the social side, I totally hear what you're saying, Mary, and I see it all the time, is that people relate to things better when it's affecting them. On the social aspect, I want people to care about others, even if it's a topic that's not affecting them. Like, really care about others, even if it's not affecting you or you don't see a loved one being affected. That's my hope on. That's my moonshot on the social side. From the legislative side, I would love to see more work and effort, or continued work, I should say. It's not more effort, but yeah, continued work on the conversions of hotels, for example, on approaching each type of housing crisis, because there's different quote unquote issues within the housing crisis, approaching each one systematically with that logical root cause analysis and problem solving perspective, and coming out with solutions with community, right? Nothing about us without us.
Yes.
So making sure that we are getting the voices of all the people who are affected in legislation. So I'm very happy to see that people will still be able to show up to Olympia, be able to testify and do a hybrid testifying.
Absolutely. Yes, I love that. And I love both of your moonshots. I am always just amazed and honored by the advocacy and the knowledge that you bring to this space. So, Han and Mary, thank you for spending time with not just me, but all of the folks out there watching Kitchen Conversations. As I said, this is our last show for season 3. So I am just blessed, beyond blessed, to be able to come to you and talk about issues with thought leaders in our community that are important issues around your kitchen table. A couple of things. We will be back in the spring of 2023. We're going to have a brand new studio. We're going to have a brand new podcast format, but you'll still be able to watch us on video as we chop it up on important issues that are important to your kitchen table. So everyone out there, it's been a pleasure for season 3. Don't forget to vote on November 8th, and have a great rest of your day.